Hello, good morning. Welcome to the September meeting of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board for the City of Pittsburgh. It's normal protocol that we start each meeting with public comment. As of this morning, we did not have any registered public commenters. So let's move on forward with roll call. So Lena Andrews.
Here.
Oliver Beasley.
Here.
Jamil Bey. Not here. Joanna Dimming.
Here.
Knowledge Build Hudson.
I'm here.
Jerome Jackson. Not here. Ethel Johnson. Not here. Teresa Kill Smith. Not here. Mark Masterson.
Here.
James Myers.
Here.
Paul Bradley.
Here.
Sonia Tillman. Not here. Derek Tillman.
Here.
Diamante Walker. Not here. Adrian Wanahall.
Here.
Kelly Ware-Sebron.
Here.
Megan Winters.
Here.
Okay, let the record be known that there is a quorum. We have more than 9 members present. First action is to review and accept the minutes from the August 6, 2020 meeting. Did everyone get a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions?
I just have a modification to section C. I arrived during the fair housing presentation, and I think we acknowledged that when we noticed that Derek had also joined the meeting.
Okay, we'll make sure we add that in there. With the modification, can somebody make a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes.
That's Mark and Derek seconded. Thank you. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thanks. Okay, so today is a little bit unusual because we don't actually have, other than approving the minutes, voting items for today. So today we're going to spend some time on some policy issues that the advisory board has asked about over the last couple months, and also talk about our existing programs and the status, and then also talk about the 2021 allocation plan. I would also like to say that when I was calling roll, you may have noticed we have 3 new members that I would like to welcome to the advisory board. So Paul Bradley is with Dollar Bank. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself? Just 20 seconds about yourself.
Sure, I'll take 15 seconds. I'm Dr. Paul David Spradley. I'm from Pittsburgh. I live in the South Hills, and I have 2 beautiful daughters who, that's what I do for fun these days. I work for Dollar Bank as their Assistant Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. Before that, I was in higher education, making sure that students graduated, and I'm happy to be on this committee.
Thank you. Welcome. And Paul fills the legislated seat of the lending seat. So welcome, Paul. Oliver Beasley.
Good morning. Oliver Beasley, policy analyst with the Mayor's Office of Equity. Very excited to be a part of this advisory board, and just looking forward to how I would be able to help.
Great, thank you, Oliver. And Oliver does take Majestic's place. Majestic has stepped down with the expiration of his term. So thank you, Oliver. And James Myers.
Sure, thank you. So just a quick greeting. My name is James Myers, Jr. I am the Director of Community and Business Development at Riverside Center for Innovation. Also, I sit as one of the commissioners with the Equal Opportunity Review Commission. Just excited to be here, excited to work with everybody around the table, and look forward to contributing to the betterment of the Pittsburgh community. Also, you know, Hill District resident, Pittsburgh Boomerang, and excited to, you know, take some steps moving forward.
Thanks, James. And as a Hill District resident, James fills the central neighborhood seat on the advisory board. Diamante Walker, who did previously fill that seat, is staying on the advisory board, but she is moving over to the URA seat on the advisory board. So this is the first time that we, for I think about 1.5 years, that we have a full advisory board of all 17 legislative members or slated members in the legislation. So I'm super excited about that. Which means moving forward, we do need a quorum of 9, which is half to be able to do any voting. Okay, so first today, we would like to start with some follow-ups from the Fair Housing presentation that was conducted by the Fair Housing Partnership last month. And I'm gonna pass it over to Adrian Wanahall, an advisory board member, to facilitate this discussion. Adrian.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Jessica. I think that all of us from last meeting's presentation and throughout the year have really had an appetite for a deeper and wider discussion on fair housing, inclusion, racial disparities, and how we are utilizing the funds through the AHOF. So we wanted to have some time this morning to talk about the presentation from our last meeting. So I'd like to actually start out with folks' reactions. We had a really nice overview that was provided, and I think some pretty provocative items were presented. There was a lot of discussion that went through the meeting, both with the presenter and then followed through as we were discussing other agenda items. So I just wanted to give folks time, a few minutes, to have reactions to the last presentation before we dig into the questions. And if there are no reactions or discussion that folks feel like we want to lead off with, we'll dive right in.
I have a comment. So first of all, I thought it was a very, very powerful presentation. A lot of the information I was aware of. There were some things I was not aware of. I think it will actually be very beneficial for the new advisory board members to partake in seeing that. So if we could help facilitate that. One thing I mentioned last meeting was having ongoing engagement with them to ensure that the fair housing thinking is implemented into our policies and our decision making going forward. So just want to make sure we really consider that.
That's a perfect kickoff, Derek, because that's actually one of the agenda items for today, to figure out our strategy to make sure that we are doing that. So first, if we kind of put this through the lens of how we can connect with the Fair Housing Partnership and how we can use information related to fair housing and equity, our racial disparities and income demographics, one of the first things that we had talked about in the group was, what is the data? How do we get the data? What is it as board members that we feel that we need to have in hand that is data related that would help us do our work going forward through a very informed, rich lens? What do you feel like you're missing?
Adrian, if I could jump in just super quick and give just a bit of a summary of the data that we have seen the last couple of months for the new advisory board members. A few months ago, we had a presentation from the CMU Create Lab that they looked primarily at the racial divisions between home ownership rates in the city of Pittsburgh, and looked at, they showed some pretty eye-opening maps related to the number of people that have applied for mortgages, the number that have been accepted, the ones that have been turned down, and they showed all that by geography in the city and also by race. That was primarily what their focus was. And then last month, what Adrian just mentioned and is talking about right now is the Fair Housing Partnership, which is a nonprofit entity that advises folks on fair housing. They went through the different fair housing classes, but then they also talked about what they are seeing primarily in the home ownership arena as well, but they also talked about the rental as well. So those are the presentations the advisory board has seen. The URA also has some other market related data that we can talk about at some point, and some policy link data, but those are the resources that we have talked about today. Okay, thanks, Adrian. Sorry,
thank you,
the commercial there.
Jessica, will the new members be able to see the presentation? Was that recorded as well? Is that something that we could view and or have access to the documents?
Yes, it was recorded. You can access it on the city's YouTube because it was recorded, but I will also try to get you the presentations, the PowerPoints themselves.
Yeah, just send that to all of the board members with the link to the video and the copies of the presentation would be great.
Okay.
So some items of information that I know we've talked about in the past, maybe we can start there. So having the information as a board, one of the items that we've talked about consistently since our inception is thinking through neighborhoods, neighborhood need, and neighborhood impact. So do all members of the board feel that they have a deep and rich sense of what the city of Pittsburgh looks like demographically, from an income perspective, from a race perspective, from a percentage of homeowners versus renters? Do we feel that we have that core information as something that's known and ever present when we're decision making? Or is that
probably not?
So I heard from Kelly, probably not. Do we feel like that is something that we should have as a board?
Absolutely. It's especially the homeowners versus renters. Income and the other stuff is probably more easily accessible, but homeowners versus renters, for myself, I don't necessarily know the overview of the numbers.
So a first place is really that deeper sense of what the city of Pittsburgh looks like through a variety of lenses, so that we can have that as our base knowledge and information when we're decision making and planning.
And more specifically, the racial demographics, so really how everything we do is impacting the African American community. There's plenty of studies that show, as well as the Fair Housing Partnerships presentation. So I think just more specifically honing on not just data that's broad and says minority, but specifically how decisions, et cetera, funds being spent is impacting African American communities and African American people.
I think it's important to have a sense of what's going on in each of the neighborhoods as far, vacant properties, vacant buildings, and maybe there's a couple of different data markers you might be able to use to see what change is happening and having that data over time. So you can see the change. I think one of the real powerful things we got from the original housing affordability study was it could be put into a PowerPoint slideshow that showed a factor that the reinvestment fund used, for example, for housing affordability with rents, and it showed from 2000 to 2015, year by year, it just showed what the affordability crisis was, where it was happening. It gave you a good sense of location-specific data that was useful.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
Over the years, we've talked a lot at Action Housing about how useful it would be to have sort of a data, like an early warning system for market change, because as soon as a market takes off, it gets really hard to do an affordable housing project exactly when neighborhoods need long-term affordable housing. So, and we've met with UXR about it, and we talked about using different indicators, and there's a lot of stuff in the MBA that's useful, but how do we track market data in real time so we can see where, housing prices are really going up, rents going up, and people are at risk of displacement, because that's the perfect time to invest. Once it's happened, it's almost it's not too late, but it makes it so much harder, as you can see in Lawrenceville and East Liberty and a lot of places where we've seen this change. I don't know, that's something we've always wanted to do at Action, but I feel like it would also be useful for this committee as a group that is making substantial investment in new affordable housing projects.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic point, Lena. So it does feel that the board has a desire for more information in front of us. So what I'm hearing so far is that real over the city profile by neighborhood, diving deeper into the demographics, questions related to affordability, questions related to race, and more specifically, the experience of Black Pittsburghers, that we want to have a sense of blight and vacancy. If we could start to get a handle on market indicators or neighborhoods that are on the cusp of transition so that we could make more targeted investments in those neighborhoods before we start to see displacement, as opposed to our much more reactive model that we unfortunately have been stuck in for quite some time.
Yes, I would also like to add that, first off, I think that the fair housing presentation was great. You know, part of the purpose is to not have segregated neighborhoods and to like really integrate communities. So I think that we also want to identify what's going on in that capacity. I know I've had many conversations with Jay Dwarren about that. And that's something that, I mean, is overlooked kind of frequently. And I don't necessarily know the capacity that we have to look at that data and make those changes. However, I know that that's one of the main purposes of the fair housing partnership, is to ensure that communities are integrated so that you don't have an all Black community and an all white community and all Section 8 housing go into one type of community. And there's mobility studies that have been done. And I know that at the Housing Authority, we're doing some work around that, as well as DHS and some other, you know, the county housing authority, things like that as well, trying to like use incentives to have, you know, housing, like landlords accept people with vouchers in their different neighborhoods. So I think that stuff like that's important for us to at least know.
Absolutely. So I'm adding segregation and mobility to the list of items that we have an appetite to have more information on.
I don't know if this is necessarily within our purview, but I'm also curious about the resource of our neighborhoods. There's enough, my personal opinion is that the problem is more about the resource, that Black neighborhoods are historically resource deprived than that they are Black neighborhoods. For example, we just don't pour as much resources, not everybody around this table, but just generally as a society, into communities that are all Black. So if everybody has the opportunity to live in a resource neighborhood, regardless of its racial makeup, I'm not sure if that's something that we're able to control, but something that I would also like to put on the table as part of our fair housing.
So really a deeper sense of that resource saturation, whether that be public transit, grocery stores, Main Street infrastructure, that whole wide array of resources that may or may not be present in a neighborhood.
Correct. So I think we had talked a little bit last meeting about how sometimes people who, for example, grew up in the Hill want to stay in the Hill. They just would like to have more resources directed towards the Hill District. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I grew up in this neighborhood. I would like to continue to live in this predominantly Black neighborhood. I just want a grocery store and other things. And that should be, I think, part of our calculus, is not necessarily integrating for integration's sake, but making sure that everybody has access to resources.
Great, thank you, Kelly.
And I would just add to that, under the resources, I'm not sure if this is something we can facilitate, but I think we should try. Also jobs report, jobs and business opportunities, because a lot of these issues are connected to the economic issue. You know, so access to jobs and access to business opportunities in these same communities, kind of seeing an overlay, but also jobs and opportunities, you know, for folks that live in that community, like maybe transitioning to downtown, et cetera, seeing the link between, you know, jobs not being available to them and how that connects and overlays with everything else.
Thank you, Derek. So we're now talking about that employment, access to employment, the types of economic opportunities and wealth generation that may exist in neighborhoods or may draw individuals to other neighborhoods because of their existence there or the lack of them in certain communities.
Correct. And again, not just in that community, because folks commute to work.
Right.
So even if there's a commuting, just the fact that folks in these communities aren't getting opportunity even when there's a commute, you know, for example, right, in Oakland, downtown, et cetera.
So you're even touching on that deeper part of mobility.
Yes.
So it sounds like as a group, we're data starved. That this is something that we really have brought up meeting after meeting, and it's something that, again, now we're articulating much more focused and targeted micro pieces of information, but then these larger macro pieces of information and how they tie together across our community. So for me, that leads to two different questions. One of them's here on the slide, and I'm going to save the Fair Housing Partnership for the end of our conversation. But we have now two issues, as I see it, when we're thinking about the information that we want. First, we need to know where to get that information. So if there are members of the board that have connections, a good sense of where this information may exist, I think it's critical for us as a board to support the URA in identifying where we may be able to get these pieces of information and how we could create those relationships. I know I heard Lena mention UXR, we've talked about Create Lab, and there are, you know, the Fair Housing Partnership has information and data that they're using. Mark talked about the housing affordability study. So one piece of our discussion going forward really needs to be, if we know that the data is out there, who is holding it, and is there a way that we can make the connection with that entity to bring it to the board? So if we've missed key data providers in our brief conversation so far this morning that are really raising and percolating to the top of your head right now, if we want to take a couple minutes to discuss where those sources might be. I think DHS was also raised.
Does Urban Kind have stuff like this? Jamil, I don't think is on. But.
No, I don't think he is present.
Then I can volunteer him.
So I would just reiterate who's already presented to us, and their presentations were very data rich. So I forgot, I think it was CMU Data Labs. That organization, Fair Housing Partnership, I think starting right there makes perfect sense. I would just add, I know the University of Pittsburgh, I'm not sure which department, maybe policy and something, they've done various studies over the years that have also been very impactful. So I'll add them, but starting with the other two, I think makes a lot of sense.
Their Center for Race and Social Problems, they probably have a lot of the data that we're looking for. Knowledge, I don't know if we listed the Housing Authority, but I would imagine you guys have the data on a lot of what we're looking for in terms of Section 8 acceptance and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, we do. And WR, what is it? There's another organization, Western Pennsylvania Resource, something. But yeah, we have some of the data.
Regional Data Center, Western PA Regional Data Center.
Yes, CRC. I couldn't get those letters.
It's a long acronym.
So this is great. I think what surfaced in this conversation was these sources, and then also the folks who raise them and have connections. Which is
and the URA also, or sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, we've been doing a lot of work with CDFIs with the reinvestment fund, and they've got a tool called Policy Map that has an extraordinary amount of data. And I'll speak with Amanda High there to get some data lists and things like that. But they've got a tool that anybody, if you Google Policy Map, you can. There's a lot of housing data and census level data.
That's actually what I was going to mention, Mark, is that the URA uses Policy Map as well. But also I know Neighborhood Allies, I was just in a meeting with them a week ago. They're using this new tool called My Sidewalk, which is similar to Policy Map, but has other really interesting data sets. So we're partnering with them in their initiative to kind of move forward with that and create some neighborhood level snapshots of what's going on throughout the city.
I think there's a lot of stuff internally too, like who's benefiting from our program. So first, like we have maps that show by race, but just breaking it down a little bit more, and especially like with our home buying program, you know, having a closer examination. And also, so we built this property in this community, but who rents it up? You know, what's the follow-up? How do we know, you know, what the racial demographics are for the people that actually get this housing? So just some kind of longer term report back loop that we have with our fundies.
That's a great point, Joanna, and it actually ties in my head to, you know, when the URA has money in deals across the city, you know, I think a lot about
Adrian, it's really difficult to hear you. I don't know if your mic is something's happening.
Sorry, is it better now?
No. Is it just me or is?
No, your volume's low, Adrian.
Oh, okay. Is it better now?
No. We could hear you before, and then you just kind of
I didn't do anything different. Maybe I'll just talk louder.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yell.
Okay, so I think of Beltshoover, and there was a URA supported project for home ownership. How long did those houses stay on the market and why? Who applied for that housing? Why was it not something that could be followed through with and executed on? So, you know, getting that picture, exactly as you said, Joanna, you know, specific projects, people's project level data that we could use in some ways to decision make.
Your volume's back.
Great, so I don't have to yell in your face. Sorry. But
awesome.
now that we're excited about data and we're talking about data and we've identified sources, I think one of our key critical issues as a group is how do we take that data and saturate the board experience with that data? So if we want this information, how can we as a board intercept that information and use it? So it seems that when we get information outside the board meeting and it's more of an independent study, it's harder for board members to really take that deeper dive into the information. So I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes talking about how do we want to receive this information? Do we want a more passive model where we receive packets of information that we do self-learning? Do we want board time dedicated to this information? Do we want presentations during our meetings, outside of our meetings? How do we think we could absorb this information once we've identified and received it?
I would say a combination of those different means would be my recommendation. I like to review things in advance, but I know that interacting with it is generally helpful with other folks, hearing people's thoughts, and sometimes a presentation, but it's nice if I have it either beforehand or afterwards to let it wash over me either again or let our dialogue be the second time that I'm interacting with that information. So for me personally, that would be, for my learning style, would be best.
It'd be helpful if applicants were speaking to some of these issues so that, and we add it to our criteria. So then we have some way of discussing it when we make decisions.
That's a great idea, Joanna. So it's a lot more like what was required for folks getting rental gap, you know, using those community criteria and speaking to them in the application.
So I would say having working meetings with you know, some of these organizations that focus on this data. So when we're talking about the allocation plan, et cetera, having them actually involved in a working meeting, you know, will be very helpful. Presentations are always powerful, you know, to me. And I think this was mentioned, but personal stories from people who have been impacted, personal testimonials, or personal testimonials from people who are actually in need, is actually one of the most powerful forms of data that we can get. And that would also help us with implementing this and understanding the lens through which we make decisions.
I think that's a great comment, Derek, in the midst of our larger conversation about programs. There's programs and there's people, and then there's this giant gap in between. You know, how do we make the program responsive to the human experience? Because if it's not aligned and it's not accessible, then we're not serving anyone.
Right.
I guess there's a question of if we want specific data indicators when we get a project presentation. So if there's a rental gap project being proposed in a neighborhood, do we want to see what certain indicators look like in that neighborhood? I think the URA staff does a great job with lots and lots of data about the project and a score about the project, but do we want them to also make a recommendation about the surrounding area that would help us compare where our investment is going? And I can see how that would work for rental gap. I think some of the other, and for the single family housing, some of the less real estate ones are harder, but that would bring data into our decision-making process versus being more of like a contextual presentation. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I would recommend that we start to look at are the social determinants of health and how the work that we're doing here might be impacted by those factors. Housing doesn't happen in a vacuum. You know, it's a one piece in the broader context of somebody's life in a neighborhood and a community. So I think that starting to bring some of that, and I agree, the qualitative data becomes so important. We have a lot of quantitative studies that tell us there's a problem. We're not hearing the human-centered stories that tell us what it feels like to actually experience those things and what tenable solutions might be to empower folks to solve their own problems. So I don't want us to be in the habit of thinking that the URA is a silver bullet, that the HOF is a silver bullet. People need to be empowered to start to make decisions that are going to propel their lives forward from an economic standpoint.
Thank you, Diamante. I'm actually seeing here on the timeline, Jessica, have we gone past our time for this section? Does that mean we have unlimited time?
No, I think we want to start to wrap this section up and move on to the next item. It's just purely looking at the clock.
Right. So just in just a couple of minutes. So the Fair Housing Partnership, we have continually said that what the Fair Housing Partnership brings to the table is incredibly valuable, and it's part of the dialogue. It's not a passive presentation that stops. It's really integrated into what we're doing. So I love, Derek, that you brought up this concept of working meetings where partners are engaged actively and presently, and everyone is dialoguing. Do folks want to see, desire to see the Fair Housing Partnership brought into more of that dialogue? And do we think that it is important for us in our work, as I do, to make sure that that fair housing lens is layered onto all of our decision making?
I absolutely.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I absolutely think that fair housing should be an integrated part where I'd say even a foundational piece, maybe not even like a top layer of everything that we do.
Yes.
And I mentioned before, I know we're in the process of crafting our bylaws, but that we've mentioned before having committee work. And I think that this is an excellent opportunity to bring in potentially other folks on these committee levels, so we're getting stuff done in between meetings as well, and getting a broader cross section of the community and folks engaged in our work. And so that would be my recommendation, would be that in addition to baking in fair housing, we consider bringing them onto whatever committees we create where it's appropriate.
I want to second that. I think that fair housing is the point. It's not one of the things that we are concerned about. It is sort of, again, the soup that we live in, and it's the reason why we're doing this work. So to not have them more intentionally a part of our discussion seems like a misstep as we go into 2021.
Exactly. Well, thank you, everybody. I know that this went a little bit long, but I think it's powerful. And I really appreciate everyone's active participation in the dialogue, and there's more to come.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you.
Jessica, we can't hear your audio, and it doesn't look like you're on mute either. No.
Yeah, Monte, maybe we can just move forward and hope that.
Yeah, let's let Jessica get her audio back, and if you want to move us forward, Jeremy, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So I think if we can go to the next slide, we're going to transition to Bettina and Kelly talking about a meeting we had to kind of start the discussion about the annual allocation plan for 2021. So if we can go to the next slide, I believe Bettina and or Kelly will be leading the discussion.
And just real quick, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead, Kelly and Bettina.
I think this slideshow just needs to reload.
Oh, there we are. Bettina, you want to start, or do you want me to start, or?
I can start. Sorry, the PowerPoint was still loading on my screen, but I'll just start with the community outreach and engagement RFP that went out. So it was due on Monday. We did not receive any responses. So we're still in the process of developing the community outreach plan for 2021. But we are focusing on ensuring that there are different methods to taking the survey. So collecting survey responses over the phone, online, if possible in person. We do want to make it as accessible as possible as well, and then we're focusing on diverse distribution. So those are all important concepts that were relayed to URA staff during this info session that we attended. So those are going to be the main focus for our strategy moving forward for the outreach for 2021. And then Kelly will provide a more in-depth summary of what occurred during the meeting and the points discussed.
Yeah, so interesting, kind of unpleasantly surprised that nobody responded to our RFP. But yeah, so the goal was, we were talking about, we were building out the survey and also discussing the timeline for how we would go about making our allocation plan, and having a separate meeting in October at some point was part of the conversation and the decision that was reached, in order to be able to get community feedback and input without kind of, because that is a conversation that merits robust discussion, but sometimes gets a little bit shortchanged because there's other items on the agenda. So we did agree to do that so that we can have that robust conversation and discussion. There were a couple of things that we, in building the survey, we spent some time discussing. One was the meaning of the word community, because when we ask you, what does your community need? Do you mean the Black community of Pittsburgh? Do you mean the queer community of Pittsburgh? Do you mean your specific neighborhood? And really giving people an opportunity to say what it is that they need, and who they're referring to when they're creating that list of needs and responsiveness. We again reviewed the RFP criteria. We're very concerned about whether or not people who don't have access to technology were going to be shut out of the process. And that was one of the things that was, as Bettina mentioned, included in the RFP, was whether or not you're going to have the ability to reach out to other folks and make sure that you get as broad a cross-section as possible. We talked a little bit about the ideal sample size in order to really get what is a statistically representative cross-section of the city. And I was surprised that the magic number that statisticians have come up with is 385 for the city, which to me seemed low, but I didn't realize that about 400 people would be that statistically relevant. But that also gave me a little bit of, I think across the board, that gave us, a little bit of hope that we could get a number that is statistically relevant in terms of responses. Whereas you'd be like, oh, we only got 350. That didn't seem like a lot, but apparently statistically that is almost where you need to be. One of the other things that we spent some time talking about was whether or not we're doing all of the right things and how we might be able to pivot. There's a long list of items that are in the legislation that the HOF can be used to fund, such as legal services and things of that nature, and really trying to get a gauge from the community, not just on ranking what we're already doing in terms of significance, but seeing if they think that we're doing the right things already, and then if we're doing them in terms of relevance or significance that the broader community thinks. So we really try to spend some time backing out and getting out of the weeds a little bit, because sometimes in previous allocation plans, it's been like, give a dollar figure to this specific program, and then you have to learn the acronym of what the program is in order to engage with that process, versus, hey, do you want us to create more affordable rental units? Do you want us to create more affordable home ownership opportunities, and rank them in significance? And played around with the idea of maybe doing a pie chart so that you can visually say, not only do I think this is more significant than that, but I think that this is 80% of the pie and this is 5% of the pie. But really kind of giving some opportunities to just really back out and really examine this in a new way, where we're kind of out of the box of what we're already doing programmatically. So that's one of the things that we ask is in the new survey is, of our legislated purposes, are we doing the right things, or do you think we should be focusing on other things? Do you think these legislative purposes are still super relevant? And yeah, so that's kind of what we were doing, is thinking about responses, how to get it into the most people's hands as possible, how to, again, not shut out people who don't have access to technology, but really use this opportunity, because sometimes people won't spend 2 hours at a community meeting with dots, to really use this as an opportunity to get as many folks in as possible. Yeah, so I think those are our biggest bullet points, is that we were going to have a separate meeting to just go over this so that we're working in timely fashion. Oh, and COVID, we have a lot of questions. We added a couple of questions to see if we're being responsive enough to COVID. We have created and modified some programs around COVID. We spent all of our demonstration dollars for an entire year we threw at COVID, and to really see if that's having an impact, if we need to do more, if we're the right vehicle, if we need to advocate for additional funds, maybe not through the HOF, but to the URA to cover these needs. So that, I think, in addition to really just taking a step back and evaluating everything that we're doing or could be doing, were the biggest takeaways from this, from our allocation plan meeting. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
No, thank you so much, Kelly, for that summary, and Bettina. Bettina, you want to put the next slide up?
Sure. Would you like to go over this?
Sure. I mean, this is the schedule. This is the schedule for the annual allocation plan timeline. We are here at the beginning of September. with our meeting. The advisory board, Bettina, and all the staff is working, hard to get the survey out to the public so that they can start to answer it and close it at the very beginning of October. What this means, though, is the first half of October will be busy for the advisory board because we will need to have meetings to go over the data and to try to decide, how the advisory board would like to draft the allocation plan. Because in order for us to make it to council in this calendar year, we would need to have probably a special, in addition to working group meetings, we're going to need a special advisory board meeting in the middle of October to approve a preliminary plan so that we could then put it on our website and then for the final plan for public feedback, and then for the final plan to be voted and approved by this advisory board at the beginning of November, followed by the URA board. And so that we could then introduce to council at the end of November and get it finally approved before the December holidays by council. Are there any questions about that?
I do have a question, actually. Since we don't have the folks that we had expected to contract with to get this out here, to get this out there with the saturation we had hoped, what's our plan to get that? Are we still working on that?
Yeah, so Bettina, I think, met with the city yesterday to talk about, utilizing the city's, larger Zoom capacity to do, a larger Zoom meeting. Additionally, we may be reaching out to potentially one or two of the firms, primarily the nonprofit firms, to see why they didn't respond and if they would be interested in helping some version of it. So we should have more to report on that front, in the next week.
Okay.
So I have a question. I notice here survey opens and public meetings held. The public meetings, is that intended to be an opportunity for dialogue with us and the community?
Yeah, so similar to, the ones we've done in the past that most of the advisory board members have participated in, it would be like that except in this COVID environment. It would be via Zoom. But the RFP that we did not receive any responses to was basically for those consultants to kind of conduct a meeting for us so that they could utilize their distribution list, and things like that. So when we did not get any responses, that's why we will probably be reaching out to some of them and maybe just community groups and CDCs in general to allow us to use their distribution lists so that we can get, word out as much as possible. And I don't know, based on what Bettina and Kelly just talked about and the need to get, 400 responses to the survey, it seems at this time that we're more focused on getting the survey responses than in the past. We've done 5 or 6 meetings in this COVID environment. That's probably not realistic. So if we can collectively and with the help of the advisory board, get more than 400 responses to the survey and then do 1 or 2 Zoom meetings that try to get circulated to as much of the general public as possible. I think that's the goal at this point.
Yeah, I never saw the RFP. I'm not sure how broadly it was distributed. If I just missed that. I like the idea. I think it's a cool idea, of letting people do, sharing the presentation and having different people present and having you guys attend through that. But yeah, I would definitely reach out again and see if there's ways to partner. I think that, 400 is a great target. And, I believe that statistical significance usually has to do with distribution as well as quantity. So you could send, the survey to Pitt and get 400 responses, and that wouldn't be, significant for our city. That wouldn't tell the story of our city. So we have to be careful about, not only getting 400, but making sure that it's a representative sample.
Right, which was what the goal of the RFP was. The RFP was issued to the 16 firms that had applied to the URA, not just firms, some of them are nonprofits as well, that had pre-applied to the URA for community outreach activities. So that's why we were surprised when we did not get any responses.
And also, Joanna, to your point, the survey will ask demographic questions as well. So we will be able to see where the respondents are from and to ensure that we do have diverse geographic reach.
Okay, any other questions on the annual allocation plan? We will try to get some holds for your calendars for October for the working group meetings and for the special board meeting where we will need to do the preliminary votes. Okay, moving on. HRNA. Okay, so we've been talking about this for a couple months. We do have the contract in HRNA's hands. They are drafting a survey. So for the new members, what we are talking about here is this advisory board has been operating since July 2018 without actual bylaws in place. So we have a legislation, a 20-page legislation that is what legislated this advisory board and describes the role of the advisory board. But we do not have any bylaws for the advisory board. Additionally, position of the chair has never been fully drafted. I have been providing that function as URA staff, but now that we have a full advisory board of 17 people for the first time, I think, ever, we do need to get that chair in place. So HRNA is a consultant out of New York and Washington, D.C. that helped us create the basically helped convene the original advisory board in July 2018, helped us identify the programs and start to draft some of the program guidelines. That was their original scope. They conducted several working group meetings. As part of that, we are bringing them back on to give you all a survey. They are currently drafting it. So expect that in the next week or so to be released, to ask you about your thoughts, basically regarding the bylaws for the advisory board, what your role should be in terms of, you know, helping to lead policy versus, you know, reviewing the investments of the fund, because these are things that aren't really spoken to in the legislation. So that is what the nature of the survey will be. They have a 4-week engagement, basically starting the middle of this week. So I am hopeful to have much more to report to you next month. And by that point, not only should you have all taken the survey by the next meeting, but they will not be able to interview all 17 of you, but they will interview a subset, trying to, you know, interview folks from some of the different legislative slated seats. So if you do get an email from either me or from Philip at HRNA Advisors, that is what it's about. Any questions there? Nothing? Okay, moving on. So we do want to spend some time today talking about more of a programmatic discussion. You're going to see some slides like you normally see regarding our commitments and closings and expenditures, but we also, I need to delve into the rental line item a little bit and explain to you some of what's happening related to that. And then Jeremy is going to do the same on the homeowner repair program. But let's just start with a map that you do normally see. This is the commitments and closings to date for our consumer programs, you know, programs that are direct loans and grants to individuals. The Housing Stabilization Program is the rental assistance program for the new members. It started last July 2019. but it really wrapped up with COVID. So you can see all the households that have been helped there. The homeowner assistance program in blue, that for the new members, that is a program where homeowners underneath 50% area median income. We also have homeowner assistance program plus, which goes up to 80% area median income, but they can apply to the URA for up to $30,000 of repairs to their home. Some of it is a grant, some of it is a deferred loan for the homeowners between 50 and 80, some of it is an amortizing loan. The green is our down payment program, which is $5,000 or $7,500 for down payment assistance. That can go up to 115% AMI. And the red being the demo dollars, you can't really see it because the yellow is on top of it, but that is a project downtown for the emergency shelter. Next slide. Commitments and closings to date for the development type of programs. The rental development programs are in purple, and the blue development programs are the for sale. Next slide.
Is there anything happening or in the works? Like, we've got a lot of stuff that's above the Mon and the Ohio River, so there's nothing you know, in the south side in those neighborhoods. Is there anything in the works out that way for any of these kinds of projects?
There is some. The Pittsburgh Housing Development Corporation is working in the Sheridan area and in some of sort of the South Hills, Carrick, Vancouver area that you might be seeing soon. Any other questions on that slide? I am going to get back to the purple rental program here in a second. Next slide. And these are our expenditures. So where it says HOF allocated for the new members, so the HOF gets $10 million a year. $1 million of that goes to administration. So there's been 3 years, which is why the first column totals 27 million. So that's 3 years worth of allocations. The additional resources, and this column's a little bit misleading. We weren't really sure how to quantify some of the CARES Act money and some of the money coming into the rental assistance program, the HSP program, so it is shown there. However, there's also a lot of additional resources for the development programs as well. So we need to start reflecting that on this chart. But we just, for today's purposes, wanted people to be aware that in addition to the 2.5 million that we had for HSP, we did get 2 million of the CDBG CARES Act money, and then 765,000 from foundations and other sources. So you can see what has closed or is committed from those lines. And we are going to talk about the HAP program, which is the homeowner assistance program. You can see that one is almost completely committed and actually is completely committed once we go through some applications that were received recently. So we are going to talk about that today as well. And you can see what is remaining. The 4.5 million in the rental gap program, that is remaining because that is the 2020 money, and that's what our conversation is going to be about here in a couple of minutes. Okay, next slide. And you can see the number of units of, so in the green, the households or the units that have been helped through the money that has been deployed to date. So, I think it's really exciting when you see the 30% AMI column and the total of 2,538 people in that income bracket that we have helped. Now that number is skewed a little bit because you will see that the demonstration is 1,648, which is really counting the number of people that go through the downtown homeless shelter, low barrier shelter, because we did use the demonstration money to provide sprinklers for that. But if you take that out of the equation, we're still coming close to 1,000 households at 30% AMI that we have helped 580 households have 50% AMI, and almost 200 folks at either 80 or 115% AMI.
Jessica, I'm sorry to interrupt. Very quick question for you. So I'm looking at the alphabet soup there in those categories, and for our new members, that is probably not going to mean anything. And I also worry about whether or not that means something to the public. We know these programs pretty intimately, they don't. Is it possible to change that to say rental gap, force it, like to just spell it out just a little bit so that people know what it is?
Yes, absolutely. We will do that in the future. For the new members, yes, there is alphabet soup in this field here. So just slow me down or ask questions whenever you need to. The RGP stands for Rental Gap Program. That is the program that is used for either the development of new rental units or the preservation of existing rental units. So that's our primary sort of developer-driven program. FSDP stands for Sale Development Program. This is also a development program, but it's for the development of for sale houses. For the most part, it's the acquisition, rehab, and resale of for sale houses, though new construction is also eligible. And for the most part, it is with the community development corporations. The legislation on both of these, for both of these programs, really speaks to a nonprofit applicant. It doesn't mean that a for-profit developer cannot participate, but they need to have some type of partnership set up with a nonprofit applicant. The HAP stands for Homeowner Assistance Program, and that's the program I mentioned a couple minutes ago, where homeowners can apply and get up to $30,000 of repairs done to their house. The URA has historically had homeowner repair programs, but the terms were different, the requirements were different, and when we opened this program about 1.5 years ago, I mean, you can see the numbers there. It's really telling the need for the program, and the fact that we've committed pretty much all the dollars we have at this point. The BPCC stands for Down Payment Closing Cost Assistance, and that is the program where anyone buying their first home or moving into the city for the first time underneath 80% AMI can receive $7,500, or between 80 and 115, they can receive $5,000 to help purchase their home. And then HSP is Housing Stabilization Program, which is the rental assistance program. Next slide, Bettina. Okay, so the rental gap program, if you remember the slide we just saw, we have committed everything in the not just committed, but are well into expending everything in the 2018 and 2019 line items of rental gap. So for 2020, you approved and then council approved a line item of $4,500,000. At the time, this advisory board talked about how we wanted to allocate those projects, because for the first 2 years, we basically brought the projects in front of you as we received them. And so we have talked about, potentially doing an RFP for the 2020 funds so that they can be reviewed consistently with the advisory board. However, Bettina, can you move to the next slide? We do have something I need to talk to you about today. So as we were moving forward with setting up HOF, and when I was the director at a Housing Opportunity Fund, we had a separate housing department of the URA that was also working with developers who were applying for the low-income housing tax credit program. Tom Cummings was the director at the time. He has since retired and left the URA, and we have put both of the housing functions of the URA together in one department called Housing Lending, which means the Housing Lending Department allocates the HOF funding. They also allocate CDBG and HOME, which are our HUD funding sources. And if we receive any other city funds in a given year, we now have to allocate all of that. And you can see on this slide that in 2020, we have the 4.5 million of the HOF. We also have on hand or coming via co-op with the city, another 2.692 million of funds. That's the home funding, the CDBG funding primarily. So that totals 7 million that we have on hand. But it's a chicken and an egg thing for the city when they support low-income housing tax credit developments, because what happens is when a developer applies to the low-income housing tax credit program, and this is a program that is operated by the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Every state has a housing finance agency that authorizes this program, the low-income housing tax credit program. It's an IRS tax credit that when a developer gets that, that's their way of building affordable rental housing at scale. So building 45 or 50 unit, affordable apartment building by getting those credits, selling them to an investor. And then if the total project costs, 12 million, those credits could bring in, like over 10 million or close to 11 million of actual equity, which is how they could then rent those units affordably because they don't have first mortgage debt, but the credits don't cover the entire cost. So that's why the developer comes across the country. They go to the cities to get an allocation of, government funding, wherever it be city housing trust fund funding or wherever it be home or CDBG. And so what happened was this whole process to get credit takes over a year, the application process. So developers had went to the URA, to the URA's prior housing division and asked for pre-commitment letters and applications so that they could apply to the tax credit program. And I think there were 8 applications that went in this past round. The applications went in like last November, but due to COVID and other reasons, PHFA did not make their announcements until just this past month in August. And in a record year, the city actually got 6 low-income housing tax credit awards out of the 8 they presented. That is a record. The average year, we received 2 or 3 awards. We've never in history received 6. One of those projects, however, in the Oak Hill neighborhood that does not need public URA financing, but the others had preliminary commitment letters, and you can see them here in purple. So the Garfield Highlands project in the neighborhood of Garfield, the Gladstone School project in the neighborhood of Hazelwood, the Harvard Beatty Street project in the neighborhood of East Liberty, the Larmer Phase 3 project in Larmer, that's part of the Choice neighborhood, and then Northside Properties Phase 4, which is Scatter's site, existing preservation deal in Northside. Those projects were awarded tax credits. They have gap needs as identified there. The 2 in like the greenish yellow color are 4% tax credit deals that the URA is working on as well that needed some preliminary sort of commitments for their 4% letters as well. 4% tax credits are a little different than 9%. It's more of a rolling allocation, but it's also a very long process. So when I say chicken and the egg, it's really weird because developers to apply for these resources need preliminary commitments way early, like, a year and a half before they close. And it puts the URA in a really strange position. So as you can see on this chart, in order to get these very important deals closed for the city, it's going to take about 6.7 million of URA resources. We have a little over than 7 million available right now. That does not leave much extra. Additionally, with COVID, there's been some construction increases and delay increases to cost that some of these developers, may not be able to close the deal with the existing commitments. So at this point, we are recommending to the advisory board that we do not issue an RFP for the 2020 funding, but instead use the funding to help get these very important developments across the closing table. Are there any questions or discussion on this?
Jessica, I think I know the answer to this question, but are there any opportunities, like are there any extra CDBG funds related to the CARES Act at the city that it's possible could go into these deals? Just because the Opportunity Fund wasn't originally just to fund LIHTC gaps. And while I'm so excited we got this many projects, and it's really that this happened, it seems like if there are additional COVID funds, this would be them.
Yeah, so let me answer the COVID part of the question, and then I'll also kind of talk about other resources that we see on the horizon. So the COVID part of the question is the CARES Act funding. The city received $8 million of CDBG through the CARES Act, and most of that came to the URA. $5 million for business and commercial support to help fixed-price businesses, you know, over this hurdle, and then $2 million. That was the $2 million you saw on the HSP slide, came to the URA for rental assistance and mortgage assistance, and then $1 million went to other agencies. That is all the city got in CDBG for the CARES Act. It does not look like there are any other CARES Act resources that can go to fill these gaps. Now, all eyes on the HEROES Act as it moves through Congress right now, and I don't know what that may, you know, bring, may or may not bring. One potential thing that Congress is sort of arguing about right now is an increase to home dollars as part of the HEROES Act. I think it's a long shot, but if it did happen, that would be fabulous and wonderful and would bring some more resources in for these types of projects. Additionally, you know, we're watching CARES Act money that goes through the state, you know, through both DCD and PHFA, DCD being the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, and PHFA being the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. We're keeping our eyes on all that, but it does not seem at this time that there are additional resources coming through the COVID CARES Act to help with this. With that said, though, there are, you know, always moving parts. We're currently going through a capital budgeting process with the city right now for 2021 funding. As you all know, we're going to be allocating 2021 HOF resources. So both of those should be, you know, coming in this coming year, which would enable us to support projects that are not tax credit projects. Additionally, we also, there'll be an announcement of El Tridra, potentially. It's an East Liberty funding source that may be happening in the next couple months. That might help free up some funding depending on, you know, if any of these deals fit geography and things like that. So there are moving parts. And there's also, what this list does not show is some commitments that have not closed. There's two other 4% deals not on the list, Northside Properties Phase 3 and 5th and Dinwiddie, because they already have allocations from the HOF. Additionally, there are some other HOF projects that have not yet closed. If anything gets freed up, we will come back to the advisory board, notifying you of our new resources or freed up resources, you know, and can potentially do an RFP at that point.
Okay, I think if there are opportunities for advocacy, I mean, I know we're all in the housing loop and we know when these bills are in Congress, but even just calling our senator, like I think letting the advisory board know if there are opportunities for us to advocate for these new federal funding sources that are coming online, that could be really helpful just over email.
Yes, I have some summaries of what is being discussed in the HEROES Act as it relates to housing. And there's about 10 different housing line items that are being discussed. I will forward that.
Okay, great.
And yes,
thanks.
reach out to your politicians.
I have a question and a comment. The recommendation not to have an RFP, this is for 2020 rental program funds, not 2021, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then secondly, just to Lena and your point about other things that we can advocate for other resources, there is also a state housing tax credit right now. It's SB 30. It was passed in statewide by the Senate. Now the House of Representatives needs to sign on to it. So that's something we can do locally. and that will help, create more resources as well.
Absolutely. That if the state housing tax credit gets passed, that would bring additional resources into these projects as well that could then potentially reduce our commitments. So yes, Derek, thanks for mentioning that.
I was just going to say,
any other
Jessica,
questions?
This is really great. I was just going to say, this is just really great. I appreciate the breakdown. Excited about the 6 tax credits. And looking forward to 2021. I think that we, hopefully can be able to fund more projects next year. But it's exciting that we at least have 6 opportunities this year to put more people in affordable housing.
Yeah, so my question, I agree with everything that's been said, was just when our 2021 funds would be online to start dispersing, because 2021 is almost here. So while it's a downer that we're kind of out of 2020 money, we can proactively look at, what we can do like 3 months from now. But when would that be online to disperse?
So if we get the 2021 allocation plan, if we stay on the schedule we showed you and we get it to council in December and approved, then it could come as early as probably April or May.
Which is really the next construction season, so not terribly. Okay, so maybe aligns well-ish.
Yeah, hopefully. Any other questions, comments?
Jessica, do we think that that this could be impacted by any real estate tax transfer revenue decreases that might be experienced in 2020 because of COVID-19? Could that adversely impact an allocation next year?
So I might need to defer to Oliver, who is in the mayor's office, but the legislation has legislated $10 million a year for 12 years. It is not tied dollar to dollar to the transfer tax. So if the transfer tax brings in, 15 million, we still just get 10. But if the transfer tax brings in 7 million, we still in theory get 10. It would take a city council authorization, as far as I understand it, to change that.
Okay, thank you. That was for my own edification because I didn't know. Thank you. And
also, City Council snuck in an extra, transfer. They covered the 10 million, and then 3 years later they phased in another 0.5% or to up it. So there's theoretically 20 million that would be flowing into the city from the deed transfer tax in normal times from the base year. So there should be money regardless in that transfer tax to fund the 10 million affordable housing.
Has the $10 million dollars in revenue generated from transfer taxes ever been under 10 million to date?
I don't know. When it first started in 2018, if you remember, when they first did it, they only increased by 0.5%, and then they increased by another 0.5% in 2020.
It's always been over 10 million. Like, I think the first year it was 13 million.
Thank you, Mark.
I don't know what folks think, but that might be an opportunity to maybe advocate to have that increased. I know FAIR, when it started out, was at that certain cap and was able to get that raised, and it's helped tremendously across the state. So might be something that we consider looking at.
We'll probably have an easier sell when we get rid of our COVID deficit. So maybe come back in 2021 after the city's recovered a little bit. I don't foresee them giving up a penny right now. But absolutely, I think that would be something to come back to under somewhat normal circumstances.
So this time also highlights how important housing is. And
yeah, I agree with you. They're trying not to lay anybody off. And so they're holding on to like every dime.
Those dollars are going to be coveted. And I know that affordable housing is a priority. That's why we sit here. But I think we've all got to be so sober about the realities that are going to be faced in the entire system and really, you know, brace ourselves to make sure that we can drive as much impact as possible with whatever resources that we have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you all so much. If there's no more questions or concerns about this approach, the URA will move forward with this approach. We will be working with these tax credit developers to, you know, instruct them to go ahead and apply to the HOF for the amounts of their pre-commitment letters, the HOF and the other funding sources. And then URA staff will review them based on the criteria of the project and which funding source, you know, fits best for the project. And then we will probably bring them in the next month or two as a group together to the advisory board for your review and approval.
I just want to say quickly, we should be so glad the Housing Opportunity Fund exists, because, you know, with Diamante talking about the decreasing resources, what if we didn't have this $4.5 million? These 7 projects are possible. I mean, with CDBG going down and home going down, Pittsburgh would be in major trouble. So it was very wonderful that this happened before all of these crises, and that these funds are permanently in place and that we're here to allocate them. So I just feel like we should feel very grateful that these funds exist, even if this wasn't totally the original intention of them.
And to that point, I think that's an appropriate time to really thank those that work to advocate and to form this table and this opportunity, that foresight, not knowing that we were going to encounter something as cataclysmic as COVID-19. So I'd like to take a moment to just thank all of those that convened that original table that looked at the need for a fund that would focus squarely on affordable housing. Some of you guys are on the phone. I think some are in the audience. So major thank you there.
Absolutely. Okay, if there's nothing else on this topic, we'll move on to the homeownership program, and Jeremy, Carter, and Brianna are going to talk about, you know, the demand they have seen in these programs since COVID and what it is doing to the fund balances for these programs as well. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yep, I'm actually going to have Brianna do a brief overview of the URA's home ownership roadshow that we're putting together, and then I will give status updates on the other programs. Okay, great. And just a 30-second intro to Brianna then on the homeownership roadshow. You know, one thing that the URA sort of in part due to the CMU Create Labs presentation, I think a few months ago, and then also in part due to what we have been noticing as trends in homeownership, we want to make sure as many Pittsburgh residents as possible understand the benefits of homeownership and also how affordable it can be with our program and the Housing Authorities program and other Federal Home Loan Bank and other programs as well. So we are working on a roadshow of sorts, which is a presentation that we can give to different venues, also followed up with a calculator we're working on, which is a little different than a typical mortgage calculator because it takes into account all these other public resources so that we can get it, you know, in the hands of as many people as possible. So with that, I will pass it off to Brianna.
Thank you, Jessica. What a wonderful summary. But just to echo Jessica's point, I mean, the goal of the curriculum is to definitely help spread the word about home ownerships and the steps that it takes to set ones up for success around it. And this will be created in conjunction with the Pittsburgh Financial Empowerment Center with their curriculum. And I mean, just a few focus areas that we want to touch on are home maintenance. I think, you know, there's a lack of home education around that piece. Like once people get set up in their homes, it's like, okay, this is something that I have to take care of. I mean, I don't have a landlord that I can call to fix something. So just empowering people with those set of tools to let them know that what's available. Also affordability. So like Jessica stated, one of our colleagues created an affordability calculator where people can input different aspects of their financial story to see what it is that they can afford. In addition, we're going to talk about the importance of credit, debt to income ratio, what to look for in a sales agreement, and even just starting from the basics of people evaluating whether or not they're ready for home ownership at whatever stage that they are currently in their lives. So, I mean, that's pretty much a quick overview and the goal of the curriculum content without getting too much into the weeds. But I think Jessica definitely summarized the importance of what this home ownership curriculum is. And this is also an opportunity for us to discuss any stacking opportunities that may present itself, whether it's with the Housing Authority, home ownership fund, and also our down payment and closing cost program.
Thank you, Brianna.
Great. And speaking of home ownership, little status update on the down payment and closing costs assistance program. We have certainly seen an increase since COVID happened. We are processing and approving about 10 loans a month. But to date, the down payment assistance program has provided 131 down payment assistance loans to help people buy their first home in the city of Pittsburgh. Joanna had asked previously about a little breakdown on who is taking advantage of this program. And so about over 70% of the applicants that took advantage of this program are on an 80% AMI and below. And we do have homeowners in 8 out of the 9 council districts across the city. With a racial breakdown with down payment assistance, it's 48% Black or African American, 48% white, and about 4% Asian. The slide you see in front of you is a breakdown for the homeowner assistance program. For the new advisory board members, this is the program where people can take out up to $30,000 for their home repairs and improvements. Currently, we have seen an increase in applications for this program since COVID. Our assumption is that people are home more and noticing things that need to be done to the home. So currently, we have 90 projects in construction at this time. And we're wrapping up Roofathon right now, which provided 24 homeowners with roof replacements. Once those are all completed, we will have completed 50 projects in this program. To that end, we'll get into that a little bit later. The next couple of slides, I wanted to highlight some projects because I feel like maybe the advisory board doesn't have as many opportunities to see before and after pictures of what's being funded. And so I wanted to show a couple of these from the Roofathon initiative that we are just wrapping up. This is a roof replacement in Perry South. The contractor was Concrete Rose, who is an MWBE. The next one is of the same house, well, this is a different, same house. This is the front facade where they replaced the awning and the carpet steps, as well as the new front window. Same house, the inside kitchen, complete remodel from the cabinets, refrigerator, and the flooring. Same house, similar complete bathroom remodel. This is a project in Bloomfield where we did do a roof replacement as well as some facade improvements with the railing, soffit fascia, and I believe a new door and accessible shower. So because we have received more applications for homeowner assistance program than we currently have funding for, we are going on a temporary pause on accepting applications. So we will be providing other resources to homeowners who inquire about the program. We have posted the notice on the URA's website. But this will allow us to work through the wait list of about 150, but also allow us to try to get more contractors on the program to try to get through the wait list quicker. might be a little bit hard to see, but this is going into our rental and mortgage assistance program, the housing stabilization program. No doubt this has increased dramatically since COVID. So the numbers you see on the right and in the pie chart are all from mid-March. So since then we have in process and paid, we have about 830 households. We also have about 10 people on the wait list. So with about 12 service providers working on this program, we've been able to keep up with the demand, although it is quite a big demand. So we are about halfway through the funding that we currently have for this program, but rental assistance is by far the most need that we're seeing. And we are also seeing a pretty consistent need in terms of the need being related to COVID. Back when we started in April, we saw about 75 to 80% of applicants stating their need is directly tied to COVID. Today, it's still around 74%. Any questions on any of this? Okay, next slide. I think that's it.
Can you remind me how many homeowners got home repairs?
For home repairs, 50 are completed, 90 are in progress right now.
Yeah, I mean, the homeowner repair program, just to kind of, let everybody know, is a very time in the sense that so the program that takes a lot of time from a lot of people. We have 6 program administrators, nonprofit program administrators, such as Rebuilding Together, Pittsburgh Action Housing, Habitat for Humanity, that are working on the program. We also have 4 for-profit contractors. 2 or 3 of those are NWBE contractors, and they are moving as fast as they can. We have, of course, the staff. You see the housing staff, but we also have construction staff at the URA. The bids, waiting for permits, all kinds of things, take up a lot of time on these programs. So each house does take a little while. And, we've just really got to the point where with COVID, especially, I think because people are staying in place, our applications we started receiving them in mass. So we now have, 100 folks waiting and feel like based on our available resources and also just the fact that the list is so long, we need to temporarily close the application. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there's no other questions, the next advisory board is October 1st at 9 a.m. October, as we said earlier, will be a busy month for the advisory board as we move, towards getting a 2021 allocation plan in place. Is there anything else anyone would like to discuss? I think, Evan, I don't know if you're still on the line, but he sent me a text. There might be one public commenter waiting. Is there a public commenter?
No, they'll speak next month, Jessica.
Okay. So is there anything else the advisory board would like to bring up for discussion prior to someone making a motion for adjournment?
No, I arrived late and I just wanted to personally welcome Dr. Paul Spradley, Oliver Beasley, and James Myers to the advisory board. Thank you guys for being willing to serve.
Thank you, Diamante.
And thank you to Adrian and to Kelly for helping to lead the discussion today as well. If there's nothing else, can someone make a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Anyone opposed to the adjournment motion? All right, motion carries. Thank you. See you all next month.